Welcome, everyone, to another Voices with Vervaeke. I'm very excited to have my friend and colleague, Steve March, back again. This will be Steve's second time on Voices with Vervaeke. We've had multiple conversations, multiple interactions at the Respond retreat. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to start offering some shared reflections, even how we're currently metabolizing what happened at Respond. And then I want to do something that sort of serves to function. I want to talk about an experience I had, sort of a magic moment in Respond, and Steve played a very important part in that. And I'll note right off that this is not an attempt to in any way represent Steve's work comprehensively or in depth. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is show a magic moment because it's important to me, and it's a chance for Steve and I to see again how our work can start to sew together, but it's also an attempt to give you some idea of the kind of things that were like, not just structurally, but experientially what was happening at Respond. So that's how the two pieces go together. So Steve, again, always welcome. I feel like it's only been a matter of days since we last saw each other. I mean,
it's so true.
Steve was actually the last person I embraced before I got on my plane to come back to Toronto. So he was literally the last person that I was interacting with from Respond. But it's so good to see you again.
Yeah. Well, the same here. And you were the last person I interacted with as well. So yeah. And I just loved our time together. And it just felt pregnant with possibility. And I think what I loved, and I felt this kind of from the first moment, was that even just sitting in our circle from the very, very beginning, there was a sense of camaraderie, a sense of friendship, a sense of, we're all coming together with deep backgrounds in our own ways, complementary, different, with overlaps and non-overlaps, and just with a tremendous feeling called, I think, by what's happening in the world, and in the language that I'm kind of feeling into is into a certain kind of disharmony. There's a certain kind of disharmony, especially around wisdom in the world, and it's got us, and I felt that from everyone there. We're attracted into that. So I'm happy to be here and still metabolizing this. So maybe our conversation can help.
Yes, I think that was well said. Just to give a bit of framing for people who are coming into this, like what are they talking about? Steve March and I and a bunch of other, we ended up being called teachers. We're people who are teaching about wisdom, trying to build ecologies of practices, participating in communities, and participating in this project of trying to build a community of communities. And we all got together at the Maple Monastic Academy, beautiful place, magical place, beautiful community in Vermont. And we were basically there originally for one stated explicit goal. And to my mind, at least, another goal came up or a meta goal. So the first main goal or overarching goal was we're trying to come up with a meta curriculum. This is the idea of what are some fundamental design principles, organizational principles, orientations, etc., that that should go into any good ecology of practices that are trying to help people cultivate. Well, I'm trying to use that term very neutrally, cultivate wisdom, because part of the discussion was, is wisdom something you train, etc. And we can come back to that. But another thing that emerged, and I think was always part of it implicitly, but became explicit, is, well, how do we knit these communities into a community of communities? How do we go about building a culture of awakening, to use Batchelor's term, or a culture of wisdom? And I almost wanted to turn it into a verb there, wisdoming, wising, or something, as Bina wanted to say. And so we got together. I won't go through the details of the structure. My intent, though, is to have every one of the teachers on Voices with Vervaeke, and as we reflect on this and publicize it, and also say how each one of us, how we think our particular community and curriculum fits into the community of communities and the meta curriculum. So that's just to give context. And now I'm going to invite Steve to continue on with just, really extemporaneously, your reflections, what did you take away? And then at some point, why do you want to continue participating?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what originally attracted me into the project was the opportunity to explore ecologies of practice, and just this recognition that a lot of us were gathering around ecologies of practice that are helping us to grapple with the complexity, the multifacetedness of life these days,
Yes.
and to open up channels for wisdom, to access, to embody wisdom. And so I was attracted into that. And the thing that was surprising to me in engaging the conversations was how much and how powerfully, especially for me personally, the topic of existential risk came into the conversation.
Yes. Yes.
And as a kind of lightning rod, as a kind of like something that sort of just crystallized a certain urgency that I felt like it wasn't new to me, the topic or the conversation or even the feeling of urgency. And yet somehow what happened for me was a kind of intensification of all of that
Mhm.
through the dialogues. So much so that actually, when I came back this week, leading into teaching a class yesterday that's been ongoing now for about 5 months, a leadership coaching class in my company, and we've been working on a kind of sense-making curriculum, an ontological redesigning curriculum, really framing leadership in some novel ways. And essentially I brought them the core inquiry of the respond conversation, and we started workshopping it in the class. I was struck by the way that also bringing in existential risk as well in a more potent way. Actually, with that group as well was a kind of lightning rod, and everything sort of cohered around that
Mhm.
and started to really engage people in a way that I hadn't yet seen in the class. And I kind of left thinking like, I think we all went in thinking we're gonna have these conversations, we're recording them, we're transcribing them, we're gonna refactor kind of some sort of meta curriculum out of this, and as a product, and of course that will happen. But what if one of the things that comes out of this is the inquiry itself, like engaging people in these kind of questions. And what I did yesterday is I kind of presenced the disharmony, that we were sitting in, and allowed people to feel bothered by it, really, affected by it. And then we started to actually work our design method in that. And so even without any kind of meta curriculum or curriculum for wisdom, which I have in my own way in my school, as I'm sure many of the teachers do, there was something already that was very productive coming out of it, and that I'm going to continue to experiment into. So I think that was one of the big things that was surprising to me. The catalytic force of existential risk is very potent.
Yeah, I agree that the X risk was very much a lightning rod. For me, I mean, I'd always been concerned about the interaction between the meta crisis. The meta crisis is a crisis of various X risk factors, all causally interacting and potentially mutually accelerating each other. And I think that that proposal is becoming increasingly plausible, if not probable. And the meaning crisis. But so for me, the lightning rod was in between them.
Oh,
In that I saw people connecting them more. And this is particularly where I felt sort of a kind of unexpected alignment with Soryu, who is the Roshi of the entire community. Because the connection between suffering, current suffering, and potential X risk became very, very palpable I think, in a lot of the discussions. And so for me, that that has led me to want to come back, and I think this is analogous to you, at least convergent, and argue more forcefully for the meaning crisis, which is endemic in people's lives. And we all, many of us noted that in multiple times, and X-risk, and trying to do more to make that not a theoretical connection, but a realization for people within whatever set of practices or ecology of practices I'm giving them. So quite similar in a lot of ways. And I also liked the fact that it was clear that, well, I'll say it was clear to me that all of the teachers had already, to a significant degree, made that connection. And so they could already, that's why the way the extra stuff was foregrounded was so readily relevant to the projects they were already engaged in. So yes, to my mind, that really crystallized in a powerful fashion. So I also found something very interesting around, well, not interesting is the right word. That sounds so detached. I found drawn to this other thing you put your finger on that I want to come back a little bit more. And I think it's connected with this crystallization of X-risk and its connection to current disharmonies, as you call it, meaning crisis, as I might call it, right? And this is this sense of calling that became very apparent also. And I'm trying to put, I'm not trying to be obscure or obtuse. I'm trying to put my finger on this, on the nature of the phenomenological change. Maybe you can help me with it. Because I'd always felt a strong calling to doing what I'm doing. The analogy I would give is, but you know, imagine the calling is like a song, and now the song joins a chorus, and it reverberates back on you in a way that when you're just singing on your own doesn't. Now that doesn't mean I wasn't talking to other people, but there was something at Respond where there was that concert effect. I don't know if you felt that.
I think that's a really beautiful metaphor, and exactly how I felt it as well. There was like this sort of mutual amplification of something that was in the field from the first second.
Yeah.
And as we started to talk, it was like there was a kind of, you know, suddenly a chorus, and there were obviously lots of differences. We're coming from different places where, you know, we have different ways of languaging this kind of stuff. And some of that was, you know, hanging in the conversations and sorting through some of that, which we did. And frankly, I think there's more to go with that. But underneath all of that, there was this mutual amplification and resonance of the connection between this wisdom disharmony and existential risk. And it's, you know, I'm left like struck with an almost like the obviousness of it in a certain kind of way. I think more intensively, more so than I had going into it. And it's not like I hadn't connected these things before.
Yes, exactly.
Right? But I think the other thing, at least in my work, I haven't generally used the term wisdom that much. And, you know, for me, wisdom is a term that's often found in spiritual communities and whatnot. You know, as a coach, I'm trying to put forth an approach to coaching that can easily be ported into the corporate world or organizational world. And, you know, I'm not necessarily saying that this is better language because it's more obtuse even in some sense, but I use the term unfolding depth to talk about this in a way that I can actually demonstrate inside of coaching conversations so that it becomes an actual experience. And I'm walking away feeling more emboldened actually to use the term.
Yeah, we talked about that in the car.
We did. I feel like I need to actually, I'm not giving up on unfolding depth at all. I mean, that distinction needs to be unpacked, and it's purposefully strange language which so that it doesn't land and into someone's existing worldview and sort of slot in a way that it demands opening to something,
Sure.
right? But I also think wisdom, this is a question for me, like, does wisdom land into people's worldview in such a way that that it is sort of like it falls into a category of irrelevance?
So I think that what Hadot did with philosophy, his ability to make us remember that philosophy is a way of life for the cultivation of wisdom, and therefore rehomed it for people in a way that would call to them in their lives. I think we need to, and I think I sort of posed that challenge to you as we were driving the car towards the airport.
Yeah.
We need to do that with wisdom, because if it is just neglected or overlooked because it is immediately dropped into the spiritual in a pejorative way, the esoteric, the fringe, the new age, then we lose faith and faithfulness to the great minds that were genuinely lovers of wisdom and have sought to help us. I mean, in just a simple sentence.
Right.
And so I don't want to restore the term for its own sake. I want to restore the term so that Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus and Spinoza can call to us again. That's why I want to do it. And I had hope after doing the Respond retreat that this is now a doable project. This is something that where we can bring multiple voices in depth and in concert together, such that we rehome this and we bring back to the table the people that have been excluded because of the way we exclude, right, wisdom, or they've been reformulated as, theoreticians. Here's Plato's theory of this, or here's Aristotle's theory of that, and we've lost what they're primarily doing to us, which is trying to, right, provoke us, evoke us. They're trying to call us to a life of loving, of wisdom. And for me, that's why I think we should endeavor to restore that term. Now, obviously, we have to do it carefully, and we don't, you don't just drop it, initially at any point. But
right.
I do think, well, I guess I'm trying to encourage you as a friend.
Yeah.
Right? I'm trying to encourage you.
Yeah, and I hear that. I'm taking it up. I've already have ideas for how to do that, renaming classes, bringing it out more. And I think, to your point, it doesn't make sense to just use the language. That's only the starting move.
That's right.
Or one move. We really have to follow that up with actual practices and ways that afford the availability of this. And it has to become something that is as tangible as knowledge and information, if we hope to actually have it become integrated with the information and knowledge domains that seem to be valued in the culture right now. So it has to become tangible. And it's interesting, like when I brought this disharmony to my leadership students yesterday, predictably, the very first question is, what do you mean by wisdom?
Yes.
Like predictably, it's like, what? Yeah, it's like, and I actually put to them the three questions that you put to us. Where do you go for information? Where do you go for knowledge? Where do you go from wisdom? Which, with a response that I'm sure you can anticipate.
Yes.
Right. And so that's kind of the point, that wisdom lives in this kind of esoteric, intangible, formless, like, what is this thing? I don't know. Does it apply? Does it not apply? Is it relevant? Is it irrelevant? It's, that needs to change.
Yes.
Right. That needs to change. And I can see the ways that my work is actually able to do that, in the way that I can make unfoldment tangible, as an alternative to improvement. And if I try to talk about that to people initially, mostly I get kind of confusion, because without the experience, it's really hard to have the distinction. We can have the language, but we can't have a distinction in the practical sense. Is the language connected to the experience, that we can actually observe something in its occurrence, right? Phenomenologically. So somehow we have to use the language, but also to say, yes, that's what we're talking about. This experience right here is the arising of wisdom.
Yes, yes. That's why I like Vina's proposal of trying to make it a verb or a gerund. We should talk about wising.
Wisening, something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been trying to do that by trying to get people to understand that I'm trying to point to something that's non-optional for human beings, which is, the deep caring about and the deep caring for meaning, and what that and how that involves dealing with self-deception, self-destruction, misalignment, profound modal confusion, whether it's between the having mode and the being mode, or as you have articulated very well, between understanding it as self-improvement and understanding it as self-unfoldment. There's a lot that needs to go into that. But part of what I think we can do in demonstrating it within practice is to show its non-optionality, like why this is indispensable to a good human life. And as we now have been saying, to saving the planet, right? And how those two are bound inextricably up together.
Yeah, that's right. I think the other thing that I started to really reflect on deeply during the week was that, one of the prevailing metaphors in our culture is that of the network.
Yes.
And networks are flat.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They lack depth.
Right.
And so the flatness of networks it inclines us into looking in terms of knowledge networks and information networks, but they blind us to this depth dimension. And the depth dimension is the affordance for wisdom.
Yes.
So
that's very well said.
So that it's like there's a need. So there's a need to go from like network to ecology or something like that.
That's why I proposed the term.
Yeah.
Right? The way to get, because ecologies are not just networked, they're layered. Right.
That's right.
Precisely.
Yeah, and the layers are all mutually integrated with each other. It's a totality, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And right, they're causing and constraining each other in a way that's self-organizing and self-preserving, adaptively responding to changes in in the environment. And that's very much, I think, part of what we need to bring back into the understanding of wisdom, is that wisdom is very much the capacity to realize, to curate, to participate, and to draw other people in to such ecologies in a profound way.
So this is where I see the connection in my work, because framed in this language that we're using right now, a coaching conversation, especially one that's attuned to depth, which is primary for us in Aletheia coaching, is like an exploration of the ecology that we're embedded within, and that is embedded within us. Right? There's this double embeddedness, right? It's not we're in it, it's in us as well.
Yes.
And it's this exploration of it by, there's in some sense sensing inwardly, what am I sensing in my body? What's arising in my felt sense? How am I feeling emotionally? Back and forth with noticing what's happening around us, what's happening between us. And we're exploring this ecological network because resourcefulness is found there.
Yes.
And in coaching conversations, I'm always trying to I think of the arc of a conversation ideally as the client comes in and they're feeling perhaps stuck or challenged, maybe confused. Something is that they're feeling an impedance of some sort. They're not able to move into life to take care of the concerns that they have in a way that they might like to. And what I'm always trying to do is to help them to feel resourced, to be resourced at the end in a way that they weren't at the beginning. And, my secret to that is we explore the ecology that's here. It's not, so the resource is here, it's available. It's not over there. It's not on the other end of some project or something. Now, of course, we can learn skills in that kind of way, and that's a little bit there, but it's helpful to feel resourced and then go learn a skill, So there's something here in the ecology that's usually being missed, and is not being embodied and fully enacted.
Yeah, I got two things that I came to see in your work that I hadn't seen from our previous conversations. One is this tracing, tracking, explicating of the ligaments of an ecology of practice, and that in and of itself, empowers people. That maybe that's not the right word, but you use resourcefulness.
Yeah, that word works.
Okay, it empowers people in a way, because it gives them it gives them something like a sense of I don't know what I'm trying to get, like sort of the geometry of the ligaments and how they can properly move and orient within that, which is much better than an often inchoate, intuitive, participation and sort of grasp of it, but it's very partial, very inadequate in a lot of ways. So I saw that and I thought, whoa, that's really cool. And in line with that, and this came out in some of the discussions and also watching you, is how Socratic what you're doing is, in the deep way that, myself and Christopher Master Pietro and others are trying to bring out. Because, when we talked about it, there was a lot about sort of, Genlin's focusing and this inward sensing and this dropping down levels of experience, which is all very valuable. I'm not, first of all, just note that. But I didn't get a strong sense in our previous conversation of the dialogical component of what you're doing. But that became much clearer to me as we were participating in Respond, which I thought was a great gift. And those two things, sort of tracing, tracking the ligaments and this Socratic element, they actually sit very, very well with each other. How does that land for you?
Yeah, I think it lands well, and I shared this with you. My admission here is that I haven't really studied the Platonic dialogues as much as you're inspiring me to study them. So I always, I hear you and Chris saying things to me like how Socratic and how Platonic, and I take it as I take it well and appreciated it, and it actually is making me want to go study that stuff more and see what I can learn further from it. But one of the things that has become really, really clear in my understanding of all of this is that the relationship itself, or we could say the ecology itself, is the locus of transformation, not the individual.
Yes. I just want to say yes. Excellent. Yeah.
So even when I'm coaching an individual, when I'm contracted to do that, really what I'm working on is actually unfolding the coaching relationship and in some sense entering their ecology and having them enter my ecology. And there's this dance that goes on, that when that relationship, when that field of relatedness is unfolding in depth, so that we're able to, the client and I, to meet at deeper depths and to mutually palpate and explore those things together, I know they're getting value out of it. I know that they're unfolding or they're getting what they came to get, right? This is actually why I'm not a big fan of assessing clients, against some kind of competency model or something like that, because for me, that actually puts the client at a distance. Now the focus is entirely upon them and how they stack up against whatever model I might be using. My preference is to actually enter into relationship and begin to explore. And mostly in those relationships, I'm not sure where it needs to go, right? But I don't need to know where it needs to go. What we need to do is actually explore what's already here. And that will unfold, because what's already here is always more than what's currently being felt, more than what's currently expressed. And that more than is actually what begins to unfold. And curiously, in some cases, the way it unfolds is the client feels less than something. So there's even a dance between that. And in some of the work, we were talking about the ways that there's this deepening in that you just mentioned. And then there's there's 4 different styles of transformation in this work. And so the first style is a deepening in, the second style is more of a moving outward in this
Yes.
kind of way. The
Yeah.
third style is actually more of a moving up,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then followed by another moving down that feels qualitatively different than the first kind of moving down.
Yes.
And then there's the beyond. Then there's the, and I know we're gonna chat about that a little bit, but I just wanted to say that there's like, it is curious, and I see this consistently between people, that there's just a sense of certain ways of working and exploring and inhabiting these ecologies have this kind of implicit sense of directionality to it.
Mhm. I think that's well said. I think that was another theme that came out, and you often voiced it at Respond, was that we need to be sensitive to the demographics. We need to be in the sense of there are different populations, different groups of people who are going to come into this, and they're going to have different pathways in, and to pay attention to that. And that is also something I've been trying. I have been talking about, but I feel called to try and foreground it more. One other thing that came out, and I actually made a specific project proposal, and then maybe we'll move to that exemplary case from my point of view, and then you were involved, so you can talk about it. But one other thing that came out for me was there was almost unexpectedly so, there was significant convergence. I'm not saying that we all came to, we didn't do data compression. So there was, we can work together and we can produce something together. And there was a lot of core things that where we were seeing overlap. And this reminded me of the work I'd done with Igor Grossman and a bunch of other people, Monica Ardelt and others, where we got all the scientists studying wisdom, and we were able to come up with a consensus paper, which did not represent what each person individually thought, but it represented something that we could give to the scientific community. And then what came very, very clear for me is that these two convergences, if I can put them that, call them that, they need to converge. They need to talk to each other. They need to inform each other. And I proposed, you know, and there's some of the other teachers are going to work with me on this, precisely because of what we were saying earlier, a way of getting wisdom back on the table and taken seriously. But I'm interested in these two questions. This also came out for me. I'm interested to what degree sort of core dimensions of wisdom in the scientific consensus paper were actually showing up in Respond. And I'm also interested in what was coming out of Respond that wasn't being talked about in the scientific paper. So getting an actual integrated dialogue going between them. Because I think of the scientific paper as, you know, very theory driven, very top down, and appropriately so. And I think what we were doing was very I mean, there was a lot of theory, but it's very practice driven. It's very bottom up. And I think getting the two of these to talk very, very clearly with each other, that was another thing that came out for me as part of this.
Yeah, I could see that as being really valuable. For sure. I'd be really curious to see how that conversation goes. Yeah, you know, from the science perspective much more than I do these days. I skimmed over the paper that you sent to us, and there was a lot of really fascinating ideas there. I feel like I need to go back to it and spend more time with it.
Sure.
That were kind of points that I could sort of reflect off of.
Good. Good.
So I was having it, I guess, in a certain kind of way. That conversation was happening inside of me.
Right.
Then I realized more of that needs to happen.
Yeah. And I was very careful to present it to the group as this is not an authority you have to conform to. This is a powerful perspective you need to dialogue with.
Yeah.
And I was actually happy to see that it was taken up in that way. So I think we've given a pretty good flavor of what's going on and why I'm simultaneously I mean, XREX is now really palpable for me, but I'm also more hopeful because of the momentum that the palpable momentum I felt at Respond.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. I really came in, came into this week after this with a lot of momentum, with an urgency that's been honed, with a sense of the kind of experiments, the kinds of things that I can already begin to do. I don't think I'm waiting for this product of a meta curriculum, because I already have a kind of curriculum now. Sure, it can be improved in all kinds of ways, and I'm curious to see how that can happen. But I also feel like there's no need to wait. I mean, there's no need to wait at all. There's an urgency here, and so, can I immediately begin to move forward with this? And the answer is yes. And so I'm already seeing the impact of and the effect of participating in this network, and so lots of excitement, enthusiasm, stronger sense of calling and vocation here.
So I now want to relate, and I'll repeat. This is not an attempt to be an exhaustive presentation of Steve's ideas, or his program, or Zac Stein's theory, or his work. I'm trying to relate something, and the point is for it to be, to my mind, exemplary, of what I would call a magic moment. And I had many of them. But for me, it was the power of dialogos to get me to a place, to an insight that I had not had before on my own. And I found it very significant. And I want to do a little bit of the narrative of how that arose, and then where the conversation is now going between Steve and I. And I'm not claiming that Steve completely agrees with what I'm proposing, but I feel that he senses a resonance, and that we're now really starting to resonate and move towards each other. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I'm curious to hear how you articulate it today, and to kind of like re-engage that, because I think it's more there's more this sense of possibility in this conversation that so how is it sitting with you today?
Well, like I said, I want to go over the narrative, and so it was very interesting. So I presented a talk. A few of the teachers presented talks during lunch, and I gave a talk which would probably be familiar to many of the viewers of this channel, and also people who are familiar with my published work and my scientific work. I gave an argument about the centrality of relevance realization as a way of understanding intelligence. Of course, there's arguments about extending that to consciousness, but what happened was, and I laid this out, and I talked about the relationship between intelligence and wisdom, and so that was powerfully in my mind, and I was presenting the centrality of framing. Again, this idea that we have to avoid combinatorial explosion, we have to frame, and then we have insights where we're reframing. We can have insights where we're not just reframing the problem, but reframing ourselves, so we can be transframing, and all of that's already extant in the work, and how flow is a cascade of insights, and that came up in other conversations. Flow was a topic. So that was all. I don't mean to say that was all useless repetition, but that was all very familiar. That was right, and I was actually taken by how receptive the intense interest was, because I was, we were speaking not just to the other teachers, but to the monastery and all the monks, and by the end they were all sort of like really focused, and many of them wanted to talk to me, and so I thought, oh wow, great, because I have some sense of how well it lands within scientific communities, but this is a very different community, and that was all there, and that's part of how I was being sort of energized by this. But then one of the monks asked a question, and I could tell that she was wrestling with the question. So she was not. It was not only that it was inchoate; she was trying to formulate it, but she was trying to wrestle with, I think an appreciation of the argument that had been made, but also where she was and the kind of setting she was in, and she asked a question that I wish somebody had asked me before. She asked about, well, our tradition claims a place where we're not, where we're beyond any framing. And you seem to be saying that that's just combinatorially explosive. And then I heard myself, Steve, it was such an odd experience. I heard an answer coming out of me that I want to be clear, it felt totally authentic, but I felt it emerging from me much more than, because I can say this very honestly. If I'd been asked that in a university context, I would have just said, yeah, that's all it is. If you try to claim you're beyond all framing, you're just hitting combinatorial explosion. And then I heard myself saying this, right? And right, which is this idea that we can, if you're within the field in which framing makes sense, then trying to go to no framing will expose you to combinatorial explosion. But perhaps there is a domain in which framing itself no longer makes sense. And then, right? And then, right? And I may be confusing the orders in my memory of which came first. So the two of them are simultaneous in my mind. So I don't know which one came first. Maybe it was a conversation with you and Zac. I don't know. I can't remember which event was first. Because I think it's that way. I think I gave the talk on Thursday at lunch, and then I thought the three of us were doing our small groups work Thursday afternoon.
You gave the talk, and then later on after lunch, I caught you walking through the dining room, and I said, "Hey, that question."
Yeah. Yes.
And we had a little conversation about it because you said there was something that you were unsatisfied in how you answered that,
right?
And I said, "Oh, I'm curious about what you were unsatisfied about."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then that carried into when we were having a small group, and I was talking with Steve, and I was talking with Zac Stein, and I put it, and take this as it was intended, as humorous. I was trying to, integrate Steve and Zac with some Vervaeke glue, and I did think that framing actually turned out to be very helpful for the conversation. So I don't think it was an imposition or oppressive, but we got to that place, and I was able to. Right, I brought up the dissatisfaction within myself, and then I was able to propose something, because I thought it would be a way of bridging between what Zac was saying about transcendence and something that I had heard Steve say that had been rumbling around in my mind, Steve, and right, and it sort of crystallized when you had talked about, people get this place where they are. Where they're transforming their relationship to transformation itself. And then what I proposed, and again, I acknowledge this is not identical to what you're talking about, but it really moves. I said, maybe it's possible that relevance realization can come to realize that it is itself irrelevant. And then I would say, what kind of situation would that be? It would be a situation where it is no longer engaged in problem solving and is no longer trying to deal with the combinatorial explosiveness of all the beings, but is trying to enter into right relationship to being per se. And the relevance realization machinery and its framing is going to actually thwart the attempt to come into right relationship, ratio religio, to the ground of being. And then therefore there's a modal change here. But I thought that was at least convergent with what you were saying about transformation, about the relationship to transformation. And I also heard it being convergent with what Zac was trying to talk about when he was talking about this, right? This other kind of wisdom within awakening that's not the same as everyday wisdom. And so for me, it was just an example of the dialogos, because you've got the students' question. Steve and you and I have this micro conversation. Then we're in this dialogue, and then it all did this thing of its own. And I came to this, and I had done a lot. You've seen my series. I've done a lot about higher states of consciousness. I talk a lot about non-duality, but I had never got, to use my own language, a through line. between the relevance realization discourse and the non-duality discourse. And it just dropped for me in that moment. And it was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I found that I was at least talking, and I don't mean empty talk, I mean rich talk. I was at least talking more fluently to both you and Zac as that was emerging. And that was the moment for me. That was the moment for me. And again, before I let you respond, I just want to remind everybody that was not unique to, and not even unique for me, right? There are multiple magical moments like that, and there are multiple magic moments between and within all of us. And that, for me, above and beyond anything we said, the constellation of those stars of insight, right? Those, right, for me, gave me hope. Gave me hope.
Yeah. I underscore that. You know, there's three things, sort of three connecting things that are coming up for me around this. So first, I think that what you're describing is a beautiful articulation of how I understand it. I couldn't have articulated it in the same way. But as I hear it from you, in fact, in this particular transformation, I often come to the place of finding I really struggle to articulate it, because it's maybe this is the way to say it. It's beyond framing.
Yes, yeah.
Right. And that's the problem. And so we can call it, we can, paint it in some, like the opening to the mystery, or I've sometimes called it the beyond.
Yes.
I'm like, what do I do with this? But in the traditions that inspire me, there's one tradition that calls it divine indifference.
Right.
Which I think is interesting, is the suspension of relevance realization, right? This like opening to something, where relevance realization realizes its irrelevance and relaxes or something. The other thing that's interesting is that the other kinds of transformation that I understand all have a kind of hierarchy to them, in a sense that there's one kind of transformation that has implicit within it the other kinds,
right.
and they kind of one by one unfold as needed. And there is a sort of developmental progression, although as they unfold, we're just opening range that we non-linearly go back and forth between. But there does seem to be some kind of maturation. And then there's this last move, which is qualitatively different.
Yes.
Any of the other ones beforehand.
Yeah.
That that's why I say it's like a transformation in transformation itself. It's like this other completely different thing. And you can feel that all along this has been implied inside of what we started with, and at some point it just unfolds. And so another place where this comes in is in states of secession, where we drop into a state of secession and there's no sense of being or non-being, there's no sense of existing or non-existing, ever before or now or in the future. There's no sense of time in that kind of way. And I think that these kinds of states also are what you're talking about. And I'm wondering if it's possible to understand cessation as this suspension of relevance realization.
Yeah, I mean, nirvana means blowing out, right? Blowing out the flame. And the flame is the self-organizing principle, right, of relevance realization, the logos. And of course, Heraclitus used the flame as the primary metaphor for the logos. And then, if you'll allow me some cross-cultural poetry, there isn't the attempt to burn the whole world. That's the point. You're not keeping the relevance realization machinery running and then opening it to everything. You're saying, right? No. There's an aspect that's not even the right word. I'm just going to say there's being, which is not a being of any kind, right? And then to open to that is to have to realize the irrelevance of relevance realization. And in that sense, it's blowing out the flame of the logos, but only because that discloses, and you use the word implication. And if we use this to mean non-logical, and that's what we have to, and this is the great struggle of the Neoplatonic tradition, we're disclosing how being is implicated in all beings, but that is not a logical implication at
Yeah.
all. Yet it is a sacred implication, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. So if this is relevance realization realizing its own irrelevance,
Yes.
right? And so it's not a suspension of relevance realization. So I guess that's the question. Like in that moment of relevance realization realizing its own irrelevance, what unfolds there? That's
What would happen if your salience landscape became a complete salience gone spell in which there was no topography at all? And then what it would do would not disclose to you any being, but it would instantiate being itself.
Right. It would instantiate being itself. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, that's enlightenment.
I think so. But I mean, I want to be cautious around that. I mean,
True.
I like to call that awakening, because I want to reserve the term enlightenment for awakening that is situated in other things that help people address the perennial problems, right? So if you have this experience and you can't help people deal with absurdity or anxiety or alienation or any of the perennial problems of the, I don't call that enlightenment. And the reason I do this is because there are people who are supposedly enlightened, and I do not see them being able to address the perennial problems. Whereas I see people like Socrates or the Buddha, not only do they have some kind of fundamental transformation like we're talking about, but that translates into them really addressing the perennial problems that beset human beings. And so yeah, and Zac has a similar, that's why he was calling those people awakened, but he wasn't calling them enlightened. That's how I was trying to integrate there. Because for me, if enlightenment doesn't do this second thing, I don't care about it, right?
Yeah.
It's just another state that human beings can get into. And then as a state, it has no particular justification beyond the state of being drunk. It's just a state people can get in.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
Yes. But if it translates into, addressing the perennial problems and the historical situation, like, and that's where Zac's notion of prophecy, I think, is so relevant, right? Then for me, that's when you have, I think that's when we should start talking about people as enlightened.
Yeah. That's a good distinction. The other thing that's occurring to me about this moment when relevance realization realizes its own irrelevance is there's no, I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's no method, there's no practice for that. It seems like it's a grace.
Well, I mean, there isn't a method. I'm sorry, but this is, I'm preparing for after Socrates.
Yeah.
And people have called this thing a Socratic method, but most of third wave scholarship says, no, Socrates doesn't have a method. It's exactly what he does not have. He does not have a tech, but what he does is he has a way of, well, you would say sort of, affording unfoldment. And I don't think that would be a misnomer for what he's doing. He has a way, he says he compares himself to a midwife, helping people to give birth to themselves. He's the other person, by the way. We have these two people in our culture. Jesus, you must be born again. But Socrates is also claiming to be a kind of midwife. And so I think there is a way in which there is something like Socratic midwifery that can bring people to aporia. So Socrates would bring people to aporia where they would realize not that they were they would realize that their framing just was not, they lost their sense of orientation. Aporia literally means I don't know which way to go. And that in and of itself can lead to two responses. People can, and many people do, they retreat out of it and double down and get aggressive towards him. But there's a minority of people that open up in the way we're talking about it. And so I don't think there's a method, but I think there are ways in which people can interact that conduce aporia that can conduce awakening. That's how I would try to qualify it.
Yeah, so this brings us back into the conversation about affording wisdom, I think.
Yes.
Is that there is a way to do this midwifery. I love that term, because I think it's like there is an approach
Yes.
There just isn't a thing that we do that takes the last step. And I think that's it's
That
like,
this is what this is why I make a continual distinction, and I'm really hoping people will take it up between dialectic, which is a set of practices we can do, and dialogos, which has to emerge on its own. It has to take shape on its own, like that magic moment I pointed to. You can't do dialogos. You can practice dialectic, and that can, if you'll allow me to go back to Heraclitus, that can gather the logs, but the spark and the fire have to take shape of their own accord. You can only participate in the presencing and also the withdrawal of the logos in dialogos. You can't make it happen.
yeah, right.
You can move, to use a phrase that I use at Respond, you can move the needle on the probability of it occurring.
Yeah, yeah. And that you do that, and I'm going to switch to my language here, which I'm familiar with, is we do that through what I call deep participation.
Yes.
Right. So there, and you know, the attempt to improve, I would argue, is actually we have to distance ourselves from that. We have to put blinders on to even see the world in such a manner that says I can improve this thing that I care about, right?
Yes.
And what we fail to see is the way we sub-optimize the rest of it because we're trying to optimize one thing. That's
Yes.
disconnection. You know, the other alternative, which is I throw my hands up in the air and say, oh, well, I can't do anything. That's disconnection as well. The middle ground between the two is deep participation. And that's what I find is most of people, when people experience this kind of unfolding practice, that's the thing I hear the most is they say, wow, we really got into it.
Yes.
Because you have to really get into it. You have to really sink into in this deep participation with things. And I think that is what, at least as far as I can tell, what opens us to the logos, what opens us to something that can come through, right?
Yes, I agree. I agree. Very much so. I think that's well said. There are truths that are not available to us except through transformation. And transformation isn't something you do. It is something you participate in. Because if you're doing it, you're just extrapolating, right? And that's not the same thing. And there are many domains in which extrapolation and generating methods are the right things to do. But being in right relationship to other people and to being and to the world, it's not the same kind of thing. It's not the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, this has been fantastic. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I'm hoping, I'll tell to everybody, that I can actually take Steve's Aletheia coaching course, at least the introductory course, and Steve and I have been talking about how to make the mechanics of that work, and it looks like it should be able to work. I don't know, it might be October or it might be January, depending on day timing and things like that, but that's certainly in the works, and I'm looking forward to it because many people that I respect deeply have taken Steve's course and have recommended it to me. David Fuller said it's the real deal. It's central, and so and of course I've come to know Steve, and I also see his interaction with other people of depth at Respond. So this is a very maybe complex, and I didn't mean it to be, but this is my way of really recommending this practice, this ecology of practices that Steve does.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm excited for you to get a taste of this, and I feel like it will deepen our friendship and deepen our conversations, and I'm looking forward to just how that unfolds the work more, because it's an emergence of a kind into the world, and there's a lot more to go. So I feel really blessed so far, and blessed by knowing you, and
I completely reciprocate that. Any last words, Steve, or are we done?
Nope, I don't have any last words. I just I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and look forward to the next one.
Me too. Take care, my friend.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.